Maya Rodriguez had always been different from the other kids at Jefferson High School. While her classmates spent their weekends at the mall or hanging out at the local coffee shop, Maya could be found at the military surplus store with her father, examining tactical gear and listening to his stories about his time serving overseas. Her father, Staff Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez, had been deployed 3 times before Maya was born, and his influence shaped everything about her life. The 17-year-old girl walked through the school hallways, wearing her signature camouflage cargo pants, combat boots, and army green t-shirts. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she carried herself with a posture that screamed military precision. While other girls her age were experimenting with makeup and fashion trends, Maya preferred the practical functionality of military-inspired clothing. "Look, there goes Army Girl again," whispered Jessica Chen as Maya passed by her locker. The comment was loud enough for Maya to hear, but she kept walking, her face expressionless. She had grown used to the whispers and stares that followed her wherever she went. In the cafeteria, Maya sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating her lunch while reading a book about military tactics. A few tables away, a group of popular students, led by Brandon Mitchell, the quarterback of the football team, were having their usual discussion about weekend plans. "I heard Maya thinks she's some kind of soldier," Brandon said loudly, making sure his voice carried across the cafeteria. "Maybe someone should tell her this isn't boot camp." His girlfriend, Stephanie Walsh, giggled and added, "I don't understand why she dresses like she's going to war. It's so weird and attention-seeking." Maya's grip tightened on her book, but she didn't look up. She had learned long ago that responding to their comments only made things worse. Instead, she focused on the words on the page, trying to block out the laughter that erupted from their table. During English class, Mrs. Patterson assigned a group project about heroes in literature. As students began forming groups, Maya remained seated, knowing that no one would choose her as a partner. She watched as her classmates quickly paired up with their friends, leaving her as the odd one out. "Maya, you can work with Derek and Amanda," Mrs. Patterson announced, pointing to 2 students who looked less than thrilled about the arrangement. Derek Thompson rolled his eyes dramatically. "Great. We're stuck with G.I. Jane," he muttered under his breath, causing Amanda to snicker. When they met after class to discuss the project, Derek and Amanda barely acknowledged Maya's presence. They talked over her suggestions and dismissed her ideas about exploring military heroes in literature. "We should do something normal, like Romeo and Juliet," Amanda insisted. "Not some boring war story about soldiers that nobody cares about." Maya quietly took notes, deciding that she would do her own research regardless of what the group chose. She was used to working alone anyway. After school, Maya walked to her job at Henderson's hardware store, where she worked part-time stocking shelves and helping customers. Mr. Henderson, a Vietnam veteran, was one of the few people who understood Maya's passion for military history and respected her dedication. "How was school today, kiddo?" Mr. Henderson asked as Maya clocked in. "Same as always," Maya replied, tying on her apron. "Just another day in paradise." Mr. Henderson could see the disappointment in her eyes, but he also recognized the strength and resilience that Maya possessed. "You know, some people don't understand dedication when they see it," he said, "but that doesn't make it any less valuable." As Maya arranged tools on the shelves, she thought about her father's stories of facing adversity during his military service. He had always taught her that respect wasn't given freely. It had to be earned through actions, not words. That evening at dinner, Maya's father noticed her unusually quiet demeanor. Carlos Rodriguez had been discharged from the military after a knee injury, but had instilled in his daughter the values of discipline, honor, and service that had guided his own life. "Something bothering you, mija?" he asked, using the Spanish term of endearment he had called her since childhood. Maya pushed her food around on her plate. Dad, do you ever regret teaching me about military life? About service and honor and all that stuff? Her father set down his fork and looked at her seriously. Maya, everything I taught you about service isn't just about the military. It's about being a person of character. Someone who stands up for what's right even when it's difficult. But what if nobody understands that? What if they just think I'm weird and different? Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. Her mother, Elena Rodriguez, reached across the table and squeezed Maya's hand. Mija, being different isn't something to be ashamed of. Your father and I are proud of the young woman you've become. Carlos leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter's face. Maya, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been putting off. Maya looked up, surprised by the serious tone in her father's voice. I've been in contact with my old unit, he continued. There's a program for military families, something that might interest you, but it would mean making a big commitment, and it would definitely make you even more different from your classmates. What kind of program? Maya asked, her curiosity piqued. It's called the Young Leadership Initiative. It's designed to give young people experience with military logistics, communication, and leadership skills. If you're accepted, you'd spend your senior year participating in special training exercises and community service projects. Maya's eyes widened. She had never heard of such a program, but it sounded like exactly the kind of opportunity she had been dreaming of. The thing is, her father continued, it's not just about learning. Participants sometimes get called upon to assist with real situations. It's rare, but it happens. What do you mean, real situations? Maya asked. Emergency response, disaster relief, community crises. When local authorities need additional manpower or someone with specific skills, program participants can be activated to help. Maya felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. This was exactly the kind of meaningful work she had always imagined herself doing. Would I still go to regular school? She asked. Yes, but you'd also have training sessions twice a week and weekend exercises. It's a lot of work, and it would mean even less time for typical teenage activities. Maya almost laughed at that comment. What typical teenage activities was she giving up? Sitting alone at lunch? Being ignored by her classmates? I want to do it, she said without hesitation. Her parents exchanged a look across the table. They had expected this response, but they also knew it meant their daughter would face even more isolation and mockery at school. Maya, you need to understand that this will make things harder for you socially, her mother said gently. Kids at school already don't understand your interests. This will give them even more ammunition. Maya straightened her shoulders, a gesture her father recognized from his own military training. Mom, I'm already an outsider. At least this way, I'll be an outsider who's actually doing something important. The next morning at school, Maya walked through the hallways with a new sense of purpose. She still wore her camouflage pants and combat boots, but now she carried herself differently. She had a mission, a goal that extended far beyond the petty social dynamics of high school. During lunch, she overheard Brandon and his friends planning a party for the upcoming weekend. It's going to be epic, Brandon was saying. My parents are out of town, and I've got everything set up. Who are you inviting? Asked Tyler, one of his teammates. Everyone cool, Brandon replied, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. Definitely not any wannabe soldiers or freaks in army clothes. Maya felt the familiar sting of exclusion, but for the first time, it didn't devastate her. She had something bigger to focus on now, something that mattered more than popularity or acceptance from people who didn't share her values. After school, Maya met with Colonel Sarah Mitchell at the local National Guard Armory. Colonel Mitchell was in charge of the Young Leadership Initiative and would be evaluating Maya's application. Your father speaks very highly of you, Colonel Mitchell said as they sat in her office. but I need to know that you understand what this program entails. I understand that it's about service and leadership, Maya replied, and I'm ready for whatever challenges that brings. Colonel Mitchell studied the teenager sitting across from her desk. She saw the determination in Maya's eyes, the same quality she had observed in successful military personnel throughout her career. Maya, this program isn't about playing soldier or fulfilling some romantic idea about military life. It's about real responsibility, real consequences, and real sacrifice. That's exactly what I want, Maya said firmly. I want to do something that matters. The interview continued for another hour, with Colonel Mitchell asking probing questions about Maya's motivations, her academic performance, and her ability to handle stress and criticism. There's one more thing you need to know, Colonel Mitchell said as the interview concluded. If you're accepted into this program, there may come a time when your community needs you in a real emergency situation. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Maya didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am, I'm prepared. That weekend, Maya received a call from Colonel Mitchell. She had been accepted into the Young Leadership Initiative. Her training would begin the following Monday, and she would be issued official gear and identification. On Monday morning, Maya walked into Jefferson High School wearing her usual camouflage outfit, but now she also carried a military-style backpack and wore a small pin on her collar that identified her as a participant in the Young Leadership Initiative. The pin was small and understated, but it represented something much larger than Maya had ever imagined possible. As she walked to her first class, she could feel the stares and hear the whispered comments, but they seemed to come from a great distance. Maya Rodriguez was no longer just the weird girl who dressed like a soldier. She was officially in training to become something more, something that would soon surprise everyone who had underestimated her. Maya's training with the Young Leadership Initiative began immediately and intensively. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school, she reported to the National Guard Armory for instruction in emergency response, communication protocols, and leadership techniques. Her weekends were spent on field exercises that taught her everything from basic first aid to crowd control. Colonel Mitchell pushed Maya harder than she had ever been pushed before. The physical training was demanding, but the mental challenges were even more difficult. Maya learned to operate sophisticated radio equipment, coordinate emergency responses, and make split-second decisions under pressure. Leadership isn't about giving orders, Colonel Mitchell explained during one training session. It's about inspiring others to follow you because they trust your judgment and your commitment to their welfare. At school, Maya's classmates began to notice subtle changes in her behavior. She walked with even more confidence, spoke with greater authority when called upon in class, and seemed completely unaffected by their continued mockery. "Look at her acting all important," Stephanie whispered to her friends as Maya passed their table in the cafeteria. "That little pin doesn't make her special." Brandon decided to escalate his harassment. During gym class, when they were playing volleyball, he deliberately spiked the ball directly at Maya's head. Instead of ducking or getting angry, Maya caught the ball smoothly and served it back with perfect form, scoring a point for her team. "Lucky shot," Brandon muttered, but his friends seemed less amused by his behavior than before. Maya's academic performance began to improve dramatically. The discipline and focus she learned through her training carried over into her schoolwork. Teachers noticed that she participated more actively in class discussions and approached assignments with a level of organization and thoroughness that impressed even the most demanding instructors. During her English group project, Derek and Amanda were surprised when Maya presented a comprehensive research folder about military heroes in literature, complete with detailed analysis and supporting materials. "Where did all this come from?" Amanda asked, flipping through Maya's meticulously organized notes. "I told you I wanted to focus on military heroes," Maya replied calmly. "I thought we should at least consider the option." Derek looked uncomfortable as he realized that Maya's research was far superior to anything he and Amanda had prepared. "Maybe we should use some of this," he admitted reluctantly. Their final presentation earned the highest grade in the class, largely due to Maya's contribution. Mrs. Patterson publicly praised the depth and quality of their research, though she directed most of her comments toward Maya. "Excellent work on the military heroes analysis," Mrs. Patterson said after class. "Have you considered applying to military academies for college?" Maya smiled politely. "I'm exploring several options," she replied, not mentioning that Colonel Mitchell had already begun discussing potential scholarship opportunities and recommendations. As the weeks passed, Maya's training intensified. She learned to rappel from helicopters, coordinate search and rescue operations, and communicate with multiple agencies during simulated emergency situations. Her instructors consistently praised her natural leadership abilities and her capacity to remain calm under extreme stress. "You have an unusual gift," Sergeant First Class Johnson told her after a particularly challenging exercise. "Most people your age would have cracked under that kind of pressure, but you actually seem to get more focused." Maya was beginning to understand that her years of feeling like an outsider had actually prepared her for this kind of work. While her classmates had been learning to fit in and avoid standing out, Maya had been developing the independence and self-reliance that made her effective in high-stress situations. One evening in late October, Maya received an unexpected call from Colonel Mitchell. "Maya, I need you to come to the armory tonight. There's a situation developing and we may need to activate some of our program participants." Maya's heart began racing. "What kind of situation?" "A severe weather system is heading toward our area. There's potential for flooding, power outages, and emergency evacuations. Local authorities have requested support from our program." Maya hung up the phone and turned to her parents, who had overheard part of the conversation. "This is it, isn't it?" her mother asked, worry evident in her voice. "This is what I've been training for," Maya replied, already moving toward her room to gather her gear. Her father stood up and pulled her into a hug. "I'm proud of you, Mija. Stay safe and trust your training." At the armory, Maya joined 12 other program participants who had been called in for the emergency activation. Colonel Mitchell briefed them on the situation. A major storm system was expected to bring heavy rainfall, strong winds, and potential tornado activity to their region. "You'll be working with local emergency services to assist with evacuations, traffic control, and emergency communications," Colonel Mitchell explained. "This is not a drill. People's lives may depend on your performance tonight." Maya felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she put on her official emergency response vest and checked her radio equipment. This was exactly what she had been preparing for, but the reality of the situation was more intense than any training exercise. The team was divided into 3 groups. Maya was assigned to work with the local police department to help coordinate evacuations from a low-lying residential area that was prone to flooding. As they drove to their assigned location, Maya could see that the weather was already deteriorating rapidly. "Stay close to Officer Williams," Sergeant Johnson instructed Maya as they arrived at the evacuation site. "Follow his lead, but don't be afraid to use your training if the situation calls for it." For the next 6 hours, Maya worked alongside experienced emergency responders to help evacuate nearly 200 families from their homes. She used her radio training to coordinate between different agencies, helped elderly residents gather essential belongings, and assisted in setting up a temporary shelter at the local high school. During the most chaotic part of the evening, when multiple emergencies were happening simultaneously, Maya found herself temporarily in charge of organizing the shelter while the adults dealt with a medical emergency. She quickly assessed the situation, assigned tasks to volunteers, and established a system for tracking evacuated families. "Who's in charge here?" asked a Red Cross volunteer who arrived to help with the shelter. "I am," Maya replied confidently. then quickly organized the volunteer to help with food distribution and medical screening. Officer Williams, who had been watching Maya's performance throughout the night, was impressed by her natural leadership abilities. "How old are you?" he asked during a brief break in the action. 17, Maya replied. "You handle yourself better than some officers with years of experience," he said. "Have you thought about a career in emergency services?" As dawn approached, the storm began to subside, and the immediate crisis passed. Maya and her team had successfully helped evacuate and shelter hundreds of residents without a single serious injury or major incident. Colonel Mitchell arrived at the shelter as the operation was winding down. She pulled Maya aside for a brief debriefing. "How do you feel?" she asked. Maya was exhausted but exhilarated. "I feel like this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing," she replied. "You performed exceptionally well tonight. Officer Williams and the other responders have been very impressed with your work." Maya returned home as the sun was rising, still wearing her emergency response gear. Her parents were waiting for her in the kitchen, having stayed up all night worrying. "How did it go?" her father asked. Maya sat down heavily at the kitchen table, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. "Dad, I think I know what I want to do with my life." That morning, Maya went to school despite having been up all night. She had considered staying home to sleep, but she didn't want to miss any classes. As she walked through the hallways in her usual camouflage outfit, she noticed that some of her classmates were looking at her differently. News of the previous night's emergency response had spread through the community, and several students had heard from their parents about the teenagers who had helped with the evacuation efforts. "Maya?" Jessica Chen approached her at her locker, looking uncertain. "My mom said some high school students helped with the evacuations last night. Was that you?" Maya nodded, but didn't elaborate. She wasn't interested in seeking attention or praise from people who had ignored her for so long. During lunch, Maya noticed that the usual whispers and stares seemed different. Instead of mockery, there seemed to be curiosity, and perhaps even a grudging respect. Brandon Mitchell, however, was not ready to change his attitude. "So I hear you played dress-up with the police last night," he said loudly as Maya walked past his table. "Did you get to use your little walkie-talkie?" Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. For the first time in months, she looked directly at Brandon and his friends. "I helped evacuate 200 families from a flood zone," she said calmly. "What did you do last night?" The cafeteria had grown quiet, and other students were watching the exchange with interest. Brandon's face reddened as he realized that his usual tactic of public humiliation wasn't working. "Whatever," he muttered, turning back to his friends. "It's not like it was a real emergency or anything." Maya didn't respond. She had said what needed to be said, and she wasn't interested in engaging in a prolonged confrontation. She continued to her usual table and sat down with her book, but she could feel that something had shifted in the social dynamics of the school. Over the next few days, Maya began to notice small changes in how her classmates interacted with her. Some students who had never spoken to her before nodded respectfully when they passed her in the hallways. Others asked genuine questions about the emergency response and the Young Leadership Initiative. Mrs. Patterson approached Maya after English class to discuss her future plans. "Maya, I've heard about your work with the emergency services," she said. "I think you should consider applying to some very competitive programs. Your combination of academic performance and real-world experience is quite remarkable." Derek Thompson, her former group project partner, even approached her to ask for advice about a research paper he was writing about emergency management. "I know we didn't work together very well before," he admitted awkwardly, "but I was wondering if you might have some insights about disaster response." Maya helped him with his research, sharing some of her training materials and suggesting sources he might not have found on his own. Derek seemed genuinely grateful and apologetic about his previous attitude. However, not everyone was ready to change their perception of Maya. Brandon and his closest friends continued to make snide comments, though they were more careful about when and where they made them. "She's just trying to show off," Stephanie said to her friends. "Acting like she's some kind of hero because she helped during one little storm." "I don't know," replied one of her friends. "My dad was at the shelter, and he said she really knew what she was doing." Stephanie felt frustrated that her usual allies were beginning to question her dismissive attitude toward Maya. Meanwhile, Maya continued her training with renewed dedication. The real-world application of her skills had confirmed that this was the path she wanted to pursue. Colonel Mitchell began discussing opportunities for Maya to attend specialized training camps during the summer and potentially receive recommendations for military academies. "You've proven that you can handle real responsibility," Colonel Mitchell told her during one of their regular meetings. "Now we need to start thinking about how to develop your potential to its fullest extent." Maya also began to develop friendships with other participants in the Young Leadership Initiative. These were teenagers from different schools who shared her commitment to service and understood the sacrifices required for this kind of training. For the first time in her life, Maya felt like she belonged to a community of people who truly understood her values and aspirations. She no longer felt the sting of exclusion from her high school classmates quite as sharply because she had found her own tribe. As November arrived, Maya had settled into a new routine that balanced her regular schoolwork, her training commitments, and her growing reputation as someone who could be counted on in a crisis. She continued to dress in her characteristic camouflage style, but now the clothing seemed to represent something real rather than just an adolescent affectation. Little did Maya know that her most significant test was still to come, and that everything she had experienced so far was merely preparation for a moment that would change her life forever. The morning of November 15th started like any other day at Jefferson High School. Maya walked through the familiar hallways wearing her signature camouflage pants and combat boots, carrying her military-style backpack and wearing her Young Leadership Initiative pin. The whispers and stares had become background noise that she barely noticed anymore. During second-period chemistry class, Maya was concentrating on a complex experiment when she felt her emergency radio vibrating against her hip. She had been authorized to carry the radio at all times in case of emergency activation, but it had never gone off during school hours. Maya quietly asked for permission to step into the hallway, where she answered the urgent call from Colonel Mitchell. "Maya, we have a code red situation developing. I need you to report to the main office immediately and wait for further instructions." "What's the situation?" Maya asked, her training automatically kicking in. "There's been an industrial accident at the chemical plant outside town. We have multiple casualties and a potential evacuation scenario. Local emergency services are overwhelmed, and we're activating all available Young Leadership Initiative participants." Maya's heart began racing, but her voice remained calm and professional. "Understood. I'm en route to the main office." She returned to the chemistry classroom and approached her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. "I need to be excused for an emergency," Maya said quietly, showing her official emergency response identification. Mrs. Rodriguez looked confused, but nodded, having heard about Maya's involvement with emergency services. As Maya gathered her belongings, several students turned to watch her leave, including Brandon Mitchell, who rolled his eyes dramatically. "Probably just another one of her military fantasies," he muttered to his lab partner. Maya ignored the comment and walked quickly to the main office, where Principal Johnson was waiting for her with a serious expression. "Maya, I've just received a call from Colonel Mitchell. There's been a serious accident and they're requesting your immediate assistance. You're excused from classes for the remainder of the day." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, already mentally shifting into emergency response mode. As Maya walked toward the school's main entrance, she passed through the cafeteria where students were beginning to gather for lunch. The usual chatter and laughter seemed strangely distant as she focused on the mission ahead. "Where's Army Girl going in such a hurry?" Jessica Chen asked her friends as Maya strode past their table with obvious purpose. "Probably going to play soldier somewhere," Stephanie replied dismissively. But there was something different about Maya's demeanor that made even the most skeptical students take notice. Maya reached the parking lot where Sergeant Johnson was waiting in a military vehicle. As she climbed into the passenger seat, she could see students gathering at the windows to watch her departure. For once, she wasn't concerned about what they might think or say. "What's our status?" Maya asked as they drove toward the accident site. "Chemical explosion at Morrison Industrial. We have at least 15 casualties, possible toxic gas release, and evacuations in progress. You're being assigned to coordinate communications between the incident command post and the evacuation centers." Maya felt a familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement. This was significantly more serious than the storm response she had handled weeks earlier. When they arrived at the scene, Maya was struck by the scale of the operation. Fire trucks, ambulances, hazmat teams, and emergency vehicles filled the area around the industrial facility. Smoke was still rising from one of the buildings, and workers in protective suits were moving in and out of the affected areas. Colonel Mitchell approached Maya as soon as she arrived. "Maya, I need you to set up a communication station in the command post. You'll be responsible for coordinating information between the on-site incident commander, the hospitals, and the evacuation centers." Maya nodded and immediately began setting up her radio equipment. The complexity of managing multiple emergency frequencies simultaneously was something she had trained for extensively, but this was the first time she would be doing it in a real-world crisis situation. For the next 3 hours, Maya coordinated a constant stream of critical information. She relayed casualty reports to hospitals, tracked the status of evacuated workers, and maintained communication links between various emergency agencies. Her training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, and she found herself naturally falling into a leadership role. "Maya, I need you to contact Memorial Hospital and get an update on the status of the burn victims," called Fire Chief Martinez from across the command post. "Already done, sir," Maya replied without looking up from her equipment. "Memorial has 3 critical patients stable, and General Hospital has 2 more coming out of surgery. I have the full casualty tracking report updated and ready for distribution." The incident commander, a seasoned emergency management professional, was impressed by Maya's professionalism and efficiency. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked during a brief lull in activity. "This is my second real deployment," Maya replied, "but I've been training for 8 months. You handle yourself like someone with years of experience. Well done." Meanwhile, back at Jefferson High School, news of the industrial accident was beginning to spread. Students were checking their phones and social media for updates, and many were becoming aware that the emergency response included some local teenagers from the Young Leadership Initiative. "I heard that girl Maya is actually at the chemical plant helping with the emergency," Derek Thompson told his friends during lunch. Brandon Mitchell overheard the comment and scoffed. "Right. Like they would actually let some high school kid help with something that serious." "My dad works for the fire department," said another student. "He texted me that there are some teenagers there helping with communications and logistics. It's apparently some special program." As the afternoon progressed, more details about the emergency response began to filter back to the school. Parents who worked in emergency services were sharing information about the professional level of assistance being provided by the Young Leadership Initiative participants. Mrs. Patterson approached Principal Johnson during her planning period. "I've been hearing remarkable things about Maya Rodriguez's role in today's emergency response. Perhaps we should reconsider how we support students with non-traditional interests." Principal Johnson nodded thoughtfully. "I've been wondering if we're missing opportunities to recognize students who are making real contributions to our community." Back at the accident site, Maya's day was far from over. As the immediate crisis began to stabilize, Colonel Mitchell assigned her to a new task, coordinating the logistics for family reunification at the emergency shelter. Maya, we have families who are separated from workers who were at the plant during the explosion. I need you to organize a system for helping people find each other and get accurate information about their loved ones. Maya arrived at the emergency shelter, which had been set up in the gymnasium of a local middle school. Dozens of worried family members were waiting for news about their relatives, and the atmosphere was tense with anxiety and fear. Maya quickly assessed the situation and began organizing the chaos. She set up information stations, created a system for tracking which workers had been accounted for, and established a communication link with the hospital to provide real-time updates on patient status. "Excuse me," said an elderly woman who approached Maya's information station. "I'm looking for my son, Robert Chen. He works in Building C where the explosion happened." Maya checked her constantly updated list of workers who had been accounted for. "Mrs. Chen, your son has been located and is being treated at Memorial Hospital for minor smoke inhalation. He's in stable condition and should be able to go home later tonight." The woman began crying with relief. "Thank you so much. How did you know that?" "I'm coordinating communication between all the emergency sites," Maya replied gently. "Would you like me to call the hospital and let them know you're here?" For the next several hours, Maya provided similar assistance to dozens of worried families. Her ability to remain calm and organized in the midst of emotional chaos made her invaluable to the overall emergency response effort. As evening approached, the crisis began to wind down. All workers had been accounted for, casualties were stable, and the environmental hazard had been contained. Maya had been on duty for nearly 8 hours, coordinating communications and logistics throughout the entire emergency response. Colonel Mitchell found Maya as she was packing up her equipment. "Maya, I want you to know that several experienced emergency responders have specifically commented on your performance today. You've handled yourself with exceptional professionalism." "Thank you, ma'am. It feels good to know that all the training actually prepared me for something this serious. I think you should start thinking seriously about your future in emergency services or the military. You have natural leadership abilities that are quite rare." Maya arrived home that evening, exhausted but exhilarated. Her parents were waiting with dinner and eager to hear about her day. "I heard on the news that it was a very serious accident," her mother said with concern. "Were you safe the whole time?" "I was never in any danger," Maya assured her. "I was working at the command post and the shelter, coordinating communications and helping families." Her father studied her face carefully. "How do you feel about what happened today?" Maya thought for a moment before answering. "I feel like I finally understand what you meant about service being its own reward. Today wasn't about getting recognition or proving anything to anyone. It was about helping people who really needed help." The next morning, Maya returned to Jefferson High School with the same confident stride she had developed over the past few months. However, something was different about the way students looked at her as she walked through the hallways. During first period, Mrs. Patterson made an announcement to Maya's English class. "I want to congratulate Maya Rodriguez for her outstanding service during yesterday's emergency response. She spent the entire day helping coordinate relief efforts for the industrial accident." The class turned to look at Maya, who simply nodded and continued taking notes. She wasn't interested in making a big deal about her service, but she noticed that the usual whispers and snickers were absent. At lunch, Maya was surprised when Derek Thompson approached her table carrying his lunch tray. "Maya, would it be okay if I sat here today?" he asked hesitantly. "Sure," Maya replied, curious about his change in behavior. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you during our group project," Derek said after sitting down. "And I wanted to ask you about the emergency response work you do." As Derek and Maya talked, other students began to take notice. It was unusual to see anyone voluntarily sitting with Maya, and the conversation appeared to be serious and respectful rather than mocking or dismissive. Jessica Chen, who had been one of Maya's most consistent critics, found herself listening to their conversation from a nearby table. "My cousin was one of the workers at the chemical plant," Derek was saying. "He told my aunt that some teenager was helping families get information about their relatives. Was that you?" "I was working at the Family Reunification Center," Maya confirmed. "There were several of us helping with different parts of the response." "He said you seemed to know exactly what you were doing and that you really helped calm people down when they were scared about their family members." Jessica continued to eavesdrop, feeling increasingly uncomfortable about her previous attitude toward Maya. The conversation was revealing a side of Maya's activities that went far beyond playing dress-up or seeking attention. Brandon Mitchell, however, was not ready to abandon his antagonistic stance. During his lunch period, he approached Maya's table where she was now sitting with Derek and two other students who had joined the conversation. "Well, look who's suddenly Miss Popular," Brandon said loudly. "I guess pretending to be a soldier finally paid off." Maya looked up at Brandon calmly. "I wasn't pretending anything yesterday. I was doing my job." "Your job?" Brandon laughed. "You're 17 years old. Playing with radios isn't a real job." Derek started to respond, but Maya held up her hand to stop him. "Brandon, yesterday I coordinated communications for a multi-agency emergency response that involved 15 casualties and the evacuation of hundreds of people. I helped dozens of families find information about their loved ones during the worst day of their lives. If you think that's playing, then I don't think we have anything to discuss." The cafeteria had grown quiet, and students at surrounding tables were listening to the exchange. Brandon's face was reddening as he realized that his usual tactics weren't working. "Whatever," he muttered, and turned to walk away. But Maya wasn't finished. "Brandon," she called after him. "If you're ever in an emergency situation, I hope someone who takes their training seriously is there to help you." Brandon left the cafeteria without responding. But the impact of Maya's words was evident on the faces of the students who had witnessed the exchange. Over the next few days, Maya noticed a significant shift in the social dynamics at Jefferson High School. Students who had previously ignored or mocked her began to show genuine respect and interest in her activities. Several asked about the Young Leadership Initiative and whether they might be eligible to participate. Mrs. Patterson approached Maya after class one day with an unexpected request. "Maya, I've been asked by Principal Johnson to organize a presentation about career paths in public service. Would you be willing to speak to some of our classes about your work with emergency services?" Maya was surprised but pleased. "I'd be happy to do that. When were you thinking?" "Next week would be perfect. I think many of our students would benefit from hearing about opportunities they might not have considered." The following week, Maya gave presentations to 3 different classes about the Young Leadership Initiative and emergency response work. Her presentations were well received, and several students approached her afterward with serious questions about how to get involved. Even more surprising was the change in Brandon Mitchell's behavior. While he never apologized directly, he stopped making disparaging comments about Maya's clothing or interests. His girlfriend, Stephanie, seemed less certain about her own dismissive attitude as more details about Maya's emergency service work became known throughout the school. One day in early December, Maya was walking to her car after school when she heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors approaching the campus. She looked up to see a military Black Hawk helicopter circling the school's athletic field. Maya's radio crackled to life with an urgent message from Colonel Mitchell. "Maya, respond to the football field immediately. We have a situation." Maya ran toward the athletic field where students and teachers were beginning to gather to watch the helicopter. As she reached the edge of the field, she could see the aircraft setting down on the 50-yard line. Colonel Mitchell emerged from the helicopter and walked directly toward Maya, who was standing at attention at the edge of the field. "Maya Rodriguez," Colonel Mitchell's voice carried across the field as students and faculty gathered around to watch. "You are needed for immediate deployment to assist with emergency operations in the neighboring county. Are you prepared for deployment?" "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied loudly enough for everyone to hear. The entire school seemed to have gathered around the athletic field. Students who had mocked Maya for months were now watching in amazement as she walked across the football field toward a military helicopter that had apparently come specifically for her. Brandon Mitchell stood at the edge of the crowd, his mouth literally hanging open as he watched Maya climb into the Black Hawk. For the first time in his life, he was completely speechless. "Is that really Maya Rodriguez?" Jessica Chen whispered to her friends as the helicopter's engines began spinning up for takeoff. "I think we might have been wrong about her," one of her friends replied quietly. Stephanie Walsh watched the helicopter lift off with Maya aboard, and she felt a mixture of shame and admiration that she couldn't quite process. As the Black Hawk disappeared into the distance, Principal Johnson addressed the crowd of students and teachers who had witnessed the remarkable scene. "What you just saw," he said, "is what happens when someone commits themselves completely to serving others. Maya Rodriguez has earned the respect and trust of emergency professionals throughout our region." Mrs. Patterson wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the helicopter disappear. She had always known Maya was special, but seeing her called to duty in such a dramatic fashion was overwhelming. Derek Thompson turned to his friends with a new understanding of the girl he had once dismissed as weird. "I can't believe we made fun of her for wearing camouflage," he said. "She was actually preparing for this." As news of the helicopter deployment spread throughout the community, Maya's story became a source of inspiration and pride for Jefferson High School. Students who had never taken her seriously began to understand that her unusual interests and dedication had led to real opportunities to make a difference in the world. Maya Rodriguez, the girl who had been mocked for wearing camouflage to school, was now serving her community in ways that her former classmates could barely imagine. The helicopter that landed on their football field had validated everything she had worked for and proven that respect must be earned through action rather than popularity. When Maya returned to school the following week, she walked through the same hallways she had navigated for months as an outsider. But now, students stepped aside respectfully as she passed, and more than a few approached her with genuine interest in learning about service and leadership. Maya Rodriguez had found her calling, and in the process, she had taught an entire school the difference between following the crowd and following your convictions.